Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to really get into it with skilled worker immigration to Quebec. We've got a ton of resources straight from the Quebec government, so consider this your, cheat sheet
Hmm.
to figure out the whole process. Ready to break this down with me, expert speaker?
Absolutely. There are a lot of moving parts, but we can definitely make them clear.
Perfect. Now, one thing that people might not realize is that immigrating to Quebec, as a skilled worker, it's not just one process, it's actually two.
Yeah,
It's kind of like getting pre-approved for a mortgage, right? You need Quebec to give you the green light, and then Canada comes in and does the final check.
that's a great way to put it. A lot of people don't realize Quebec has its own selection process. You need Quebec to say oui first. And that means you got to get your Certificat de Sélection du Québec, your
The
CSQ.
CSQ,
Yeah.
that's the document, right?
Yeah.
So it's like Quebec gives you the key, but Canada still has the master key to the
Yeah.
front door.
Exactly. Without that CSQ, your application to the Canadian government, it won't even be looked at. It's Quebec's way of saying, we think you have the skills and experience our province needs.
Okay, so let's say I'm Sarah, a software developer. I got my eye on Quebec City. What are my options for snagging that CSQ?
Well, Sarah, and anyone else listening who's thinking, Quebec, here I come. There are two main programs for skilled workers like you. The regular skilled worker program, we call it the RSWP for short, and then there's the Quebec Experience Program. That one's known as the PQ.
Two paths, same destination.
Yeah.
That's CSQ. Let's start with the RSWP.
Yeah, all right. The RSWP is all about assessing your overall profile, your skills, your education, how well you speak, even your spouse's background. It all gets factored in.
Wow, so it's like this complex algorithm. Quebec's looking for candidates who really check all the boxes. And there's a point system too, right?
Right?
Can you break that down a little bit?
Definitely. It's not quite as simple as like winning a game or something. But your age, your education, your work experience, how you speak French and English, all those factors get tallied up on this points grid, and you need to hit a certain score even to be considered.
And speaking of language, didn't I read somewhere that speaking French is a pretty big deal in Quebec?
It is, it is. Knowing French, it'll seriously boost your points on that RSWP grid. The better your French, the higher your score, and honestly, it's just a huge help when you're trying to, become a part of Quebec society.
Makes total sense. It is Quebec after all. What about age? Does that factor in at all?
It does. Younger applicants, they actually get more points under the RSWP. The thinking is if you're under 42, you've got a longer working life ahead of you to contribute to Quebec's economy.
So younger, fluent in French, got it. What about financial stability? I imagine Quebec wants to know you can pay your bills, right?
Oh, yeah. Having the skills is great, but you also have to be able to support yourself, right? Right now, you've got to prove you've got enough money to support yourself and any family members coming with you for at least your first 3 months in Quebec.
Financial planning is key. Is there anything else our software developer Sarah should know about the RSWP before we jump to the PQ?
One more thing. It's not like mandatory or anything, but having a job offer from an employer in Quebec, that can really give your application a boost. It shows there's a real need for someone with your skills.
So it's like having a VIP pass to the front of the line?
Kind of, yeah. It shows an employer's ready to hire you, but even without a job offer, the RSWP is still a good option. You'll just need to have a higher score to be competitive.
Good to know. Now let's talk about that other path to the CSQ, the Quebec Experience Program, the PEQ. This one seems perfect for folks who are already familiar with Quebec.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. The PQ is for those who've already, dipped their toes into life in Quebec, either as a temporary foreign worker or maybe they recently graduated from a school in Quebec.
So it's all about having experience in the province. Makes sense, given the name.
Exactly. But keep in mind, there are two different paths within the PQ, each with its own set of rules. The temporary foreign worker stream and the Quebec graduate stream.
Okay, let's dive into those a bit. Starting with the Quebec graduate stream. If our friend Sarah had studied in Quebec, what would she need to know about this path?
First things first, her diploma, it has to be from a school in Quebec that's recognized. And it can't be just any program. It has to be on their list of eligible diplomas.
So they're looking for specific fields that Quebec needs.
Exactly. And the thing about French, it's even more important under the PQ's graduate stream. You're going to need to show a higher level of French than you would for the RSWP.
Oh, wow. Just how fluent are we talking? I'm guessing bonjour and merci won't quite cut it here.
You're going to need a good grasp on both written and spoken French. Think like at least a level 7 on the Quebec scale, that's for speaking, and a level 5 for writing.
Wow. Fluency is key for this one. No wonder they call it the experience program. They want you to, like, really live and breathe it.
Exactly. And don't forget the time commitment. If Sarah was thinking she could just, do a quick program to get that diploma, think again, she'd have to have actually lived in Quebec for at least half the length of her program.
So it's about truly immersing yourself in the culture, not just checking a box.
Right.
Okay, let's say Sarah wasn't a student, but a temporary foreign worker in Quebec. What does she need to know about that PK stream?
For temporary foreign workers, it becomes more about your work experience than your education. You usually need at least 2 years of full-time skilled work in Quebec within the last 3 years.
And not just any job,
All right.
right? It has to be something skilled.
That's right. The job has to be what Canada considers a skilled occupation under their system, the National Occupational Classification System, or NOC. It basically categorizes jobs based on the skills they require.
So if Sarah's software development job fits into that NOC system and she's got the work experience to back it up, she could be good to go.
She could be, but just like with that graduate stream, she'd need to show she can speak French well. The exact level depends, but it's definitely important.
So whether you're a grad or a temp worker, Quebec wants to see that you've got the skills, the experience, and you can communicate to really thrive there.
Exactly. They want to see that you're serious about building a life in Quebec, not just, using it as a quick way into Canada.
This is so helpful, expert speaker. Now, listeners, we've covered a lot, but don't worry, this is just the beginning.
There's a lot more to unpack.
We'll be back in a bit to dig into how to actually express your interest in these programs, what happens after you're selected, and other key things to keep in mind when we come back for part 2 of this deep dive. Stay with us. Welcome back to the deep dive. Before we took a little break, we were mapping out the RSWP and the PEQ, those two paths to skilled worker immigration to Quebec. Now, let's say you've checked them out, you've picked your program, you're ready to actually make this happen. How do you officially, throw your hat in the ring?
That's where the expression of interest comes in. We call it an EOI for short. It's the first real step for both the RSWP and the PEQ.
So you're basically raising your hand saying, hey, Quebec, over here, I'm ready.
Yeah, exactly. It's your way of putting yourself on their radar. You're saying, here's who I am, here's what I can do, and I think I could be a great addition to Quebec.
And this part's free, right? No need to break the bank just yet.
You got it. Submitting an EOI, totally free. It's great because it means everyone gets a fair shot at expressing their interest, without worrying about the money.
I love that. Okay, so for our listeners who are like, all right, I'm ready to do this thing, what does submitting an EOI actually look like in practice?
It's all done online through this platform called Arima. You'll make an account, start filling out your profile, all that stuff we talked about, education, work experience, language skills, it all goes in there.
So this is where all those details, they really come into play.
Yeah.
Age, work experience, language scores, everything matters.
It all matters. It's your chance to show Quebec why you'd be such a valuable asset. Be detailed, be accurate, and make sure everything's up to date.
And what happens after you hit submit? Is it instant or is there some waiting involved?
There's definitely some waiting, but it's strategic. Your EOI, it goes into a pool with everyone else's. Then, periodically, Quebec will have these draws, and they'll invite candidates who meet certain requirements to actually apply for permanent selection.
So it's kind of like a lottery, but instead of random numbers, it's based on your skills and how well you fit what Quebec needs right now.
Exactly. And the thing is, they actually tell you the selection criteria for each draw beforehand, so you have an idea of what they're looking for. But these criteria can totally change from one draw to the next, depending on, what's going on in the job market and what the government's priorities are.
So it's essential to stay informed and keep checking back to see if your profile is a good match for what they're looking for.
Absolutely. And here's a pro tip for your listeners. Keep your EOI updated. If something changes, you get a new degree, you gain more experience, your French improves, update it.
Because you never know when Quebec might be looking for someone with your newly updated skills. Got to stay proactive.
Exactly. Think of your EOI as a living document. It should always reflect where you're at.
Okay, so you've submitted your EOI, you've been tracking those draws, and finally you get the invitation. You're invited to apply for permanent selection. That's got to feel amazing.
It's huge, but it's important to remember this is just one step.
Right, like reaching base camp on Everest. You've climbed high, but you're not at the summit just yet. Now Quebec really gets to look at your application right. What all happens during this stage?
Quebec is going to, go through everything with a fine-tooth comb, making sure you meet all the criteria for the specific program you applied for.
Time to triple check for typos. Make sure you haven't forgotten any documents.
Exactly. All the supporting documents, birth certificate, marriage certificate if that applies, diplomas, work references, proof of your language skills, make sure it's all there. Oh, and don't forget the attestation of learning about democratic values and Quebec
Oh
values.
yeah, that's important. Tell us more about this attestation.
This is something they added fairly recently, back in 2020. You have to take a course online and pass a test all about Quebec's values.
So it's their way of making sure new arrivals, really understand and respect how things work in Quebec.
That's it.
Okay, back to the timeline. How long does all this take?
It's really tough to say for sure. It depends how many applications they're processing, how complex your situation is, things like that. The government website, they have these estimated processing times for each program.
Perfect. We'll be sure to link those in the show notes so you can check them out if you're thinking about starting this process.
Always a good idea to be prepared for a bit of a wait. It's not going to happen overnight.
Absolutely. Let's talk about those possible outcomes. Best case scenario. Your application is approved. What happens then?
Then it's celebration time. Being selected, it means you've met all the requirements, and Quebec's giving you and your family, if they're coming your CSQ, that all-important Quebec selection certificate.
Which, like we talked about, is your ticket to move on to the next stage with the Canadian government. But what if things don't go so well? What if your application isn't successful?
Okay, so there are two possibilities. It could be refused, or it could be rejected. And there's a difference.
Refusal versus rejection. Okay.
Okay.
What's the difference?
Refusal, it usually means you didn't quite tick all the boxes, maybe not enough points under the RSWP, your French wasn't at the right level, maybe you couldn't prove you could support yourself financially.
So, like, you didn't quite meet those set-in-stone requirements.
Exactly. Rejection, that's a little more serious. That usually means they have reason to doubt whether the information or documents you provided, like whether they're legit.
Yikes. Talk about nerve-wracking.
Yeah,
So being honest and transparent throughout the whole process is absolutely crucial.
absolutely. Honesty is always the best policy.
Okay, you've made it through. Quebec loves you. You've got your CSQ in hand. Congratulations. But this is where Canada steps back in.
You got it. Remember, Quebec's selection process, it's just step one.
Right, that two-step process we talked about. To actually immigrate and live in Quebec, you've got to go through Canada's own admission process.
You do. But don't worry, we'll break it all down.
This feels like a whole other deep dive.
It is, but we're here to guide you. We'll get into all the specifics of what the feds require when we come back for the final part of today's deep dive. Don't go anywhere.
Welcome back, deep divers. We're in the home stretch of our exploration into skilled worker immigration to Quebec.
We are.
We've tackled the Quebec selection process,
Yep.
snagged that all-important CSQ, that Quebec selection certificate,
Right.
and we've navigated the ins and outs of the Canadian government's admission process.
It's quite a journey.
It is.
But you've done it. You've impressed both Quebec and Canada.
Ooh.
And that coveted COPR, that confirmation of permanent residence, it's yours.
Yes.
Congratulations.
What a journey. Now, is it time to pack our bags? Are we buying plane tickets? Are we officially saying bonjour to Quebec?
You're so close.
Okay.
So exciting.
I know.
But there are just a couple more logistical things to take care of before you're actually settled in Quebec.
Okay.
That COPR, as exciting as it is, it's not your actual permanent resident card.
No, it's not.
It's more like think of it as your one-time entry ticket into Canada.
Ah, okay. So, it's the official document that says, you're good to come in, we're excited to have you as a permanent resident, but you need to get your, actual ID once you're here.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. Once you land in Canada, you'll go through this landing process with a Canadian immigration officer.
Okay.
They'll look over your COPR, check your other documents, and officially, formally grant you permanent resident status.
So that's the moment.
That's the moment.
It becomes real.
It does. You're really there.
So exciting.
And pretty soon after that, you'll get your permanent resident card in the mail. That card's going to be your proof of status in Canada. You'll need it for everything.
Yeah.
Opening a bank account, accessing healthcare, all of it.
It's your golden ticket
It really is.
to building a life in Canada.
Exactly.
Now, while you're settling into your new life in Quebec, remember how we talked about French being so important?
Oh, yeah.
Quebec has some amazing resources for new arrivals.
They really do.
Like what kind of things?
Well, they've got free language classes,
Amazing.
integration programs specifically designed for newcomers,
Wow.
things like that.
That's incredible.
They're super helpful when it comes to adjusting to life in Quebec.
It sounds like Quebec is really, invested in making sure newcomers succeed.
They are.
That's great.
They want you to thrive.
Yeah.
Now, Before we wrap things up here, can I just circle back to something we touched on earlier?
Sir.
Choosing between the RSWP and the PQ,
Right.
if someone is eligible for both, how do they decide?
Ooh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
It's like picking between two, like, scenic routes.
Hmm.
They both lead to the same destination, but the journey's different.
That's a perfect way to put it. For those who qualify, the PEQ, the Quebec Experience Program, that's usually the faster option.
Okay.
We could be talking like twice as fast as the RSWP.
Wow, that's a big difference.
It is. But the PEQ has those stricter French language requirements.
Right.
So that's a major factor to think about.
Huge. So even if the PQ sounds tempting, you got to be realistic about your French skills.
Exactly. There's no getting around that.
So really, it boils down to assessing your own situation, weighing those options, and figuring out which path truly aligns with your goals.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Perfect. Well, it seems like we've reached the summit of our Quebec Skilled Worker Immigration Deep Dive.
We did it.
Expert speaker, thank you so much for being our guide through this complex world.
Happy to help.
And to all you deep divers out there, if you're ready to embark on your own Quebec immigration adventure, we're sending you the best of luck. It's a journey, that's for sure.
It is a journey.
Patience, planning, lots of paperwork.
It's true.
But the rewards, building a life in a place like Quebec, those can be huge.
They really can. And don't forget to connect with other immigrants who've already gone through this.
Oh, that's great advice.
Their experiences and advice, it can be so helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this edition of The Deep Dive. Until next time, keep exploring.